In most but not all cases, nerves have a resting potential of minus 70 millivolts. Polarization is where the membrane is not stimulated, the charges are balanced and it does not have an impulse to carry. When a nerve becomes depolarized, the membrane potential becomes less negative. The potential is less polarized than the resting potential. Hyperpolarization is where the potential becomes more polarized or more negative than resting potential. Repolarization is where the potential returns to resting potential after being depolarized. Here's the membrane of a neuron where the charges are balanced. The outside is positive and the inside is negative. When the charges are balanced, the membrane has a resting potential of minus 70 millivolts. When a local area of the membrane experiences a triggering event, specific channels open and ions flood in, typically sodium ions. This causes the charges to become unbalanced. The local area becomes depolarized, therefore the membrane becomes less negative and a graded potential is produced. Across a short distance of the membrane, depolarization spreads by a current to adjacent inactive areas, away from the point of origin. The level of depolarization is always highest at the point of origin, shown here with minus 55 millivolts. This is called the decremental spread of a graded potential. The adjacent areas become depolarized. They have a slightly more negative potential of minus 60 millivolts compared to the point of origin. The areas that show minus 70 millivolts are at resting potential. They are yet to be depolarized. Generally, graded potentials die out over short distances on the membrane. The distance they spread depends on the intensity of the stimulus or triggering event that the neuron receives. Action potentials are also called all or nothing potentials. They are very different from graded potentials. They are brief, rapid, and cause large changes in the membrane potential. In graded potential, we saw small changes in the voltage from resting potential, where in action potential, changes can be around 100 millivolts. The change in potential is driven by ion movement due to changes in permeability. These are driven by voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels. Voltage-gated sodium channels have three states. They can be closed but capable of being opened. This is at a voltage where it is not open, but a change in voltage will cause it to. They can be open and activated. This is when the voltage is enough to cause a conformational change in shape to the gate, so sodium can enter. Closed and not capable of being opened. Inactivated. A change in membrane voltage will not cause this gate to open. This protects the nerve from exhaustion and helps in the refractory period. The opening of sodium channels leads to depolarization. Potassium channels are much simpler. They are either open or closed. The opening of potassium channels leads to repolarization. The diagram shows the voltage of the membrane versus time in milliseconds. Point 1 shows the resting potential. All the voltage-gated channels are closed. They are not at the correct voltage to be opened, but a slow depolarizing event leads to the membrane to reach the threshold. At point 2, it has reached the threshold, also called the point of no return. The sodium activation gates open and the permeability of sodium rises. At point 3, sodium begins to enter the cell, causing an explosive depolarization to around plus 30 millivolts. This generates the rising phase of the action potential. At point 4, we see the peak of the action potential. Sodium inactivation gate closes and the permeability to sodium falls, ending net movement of sodium into the cell. At the same time, potassium activation gate opens and the permeability to potassium rises. At point 5, potassium begins to leave the cell, causing its repolarization to resting potential. At point 5, potassium begins to leave the cell, causing the nerve to become repolarized to resting potential. This generates the falling phase of action potential. At point 6, on the return to resting potential, sodium activation gate closes and the inactivation gate opens. This resets the channel to respond to another depolarizing triggering event. At point 7, further outward movement of potassium through potassium channels that are still open briefly hyperpolarizes the membrane. At point 8, potassium activation gate closes and the membrane returns to its resting potential.